The galaxy had known peace for over 3,000 years, a feat achieved through diplomatic treaties and mutual agreements. The Galactic Empire, the most powerful collective in the universe, had long maintained order, subduing any potential conflicts through superior force and strategic alliances. Their technologies were unparalleled, their influence extending across countless systems. Civilizations that once knew war had become peaceful, flourishing under the rule of the Empire's carefully managed order. In this system there was no room for rebellion or unrest, until now. Humanity, a species that had only recently entered the galactic scene, had been mostly a neutral presence. The history of Earth was one of endless wars, struggle and chaos, but those days were behind them. After the horrors of their past, humans had found a way to coexist with the more advanced species. They had integrated into the galactic community slowly, offering technological advancements, trade goods and cultural exchange, but had never been a significant player. They were viewed as newcomers, their history a brief anomaly in the great span of galactic peace. The 3,000-year peace was fragile, but no one had anticipated that it would be the Galactic Empire itself that would break it. It started subtly. A shift in policy, a new directive from the Empire's leadership, a decision to expand their influence in a region that had always been neutral. It was minor at first, dismissed as a bureaucratic blunder by some, but the repercussions were far-reaching. The Empire began pushing its borders into previously uncontested territories once guarded by treaties that no longer seemed to matter. What followed was swift and violent. A peaceful colony, a species that had lived under the Empire's protection for millennia, was suddenly attacked. The reasons for this aggression were unclear. An internal power struggle, perhaps, or a new ruler with imperial ambitions. But whatever the cause, the event shook the galaxy to its core. The breach was blatant, an act of war, and it shattered the long-standing trust between species. Diplomatic channels were immediately opened, and emergency meetings were called. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy gathered, but the focus was on the Galactic Empire. How could they have done this? What had caused such a reckless move? The Empire's response was cold, calculated, and full of denials. They claimed it was an isolated incident, a misstep of a few rogue commanders, but the damage had already been done. The Empire's reputation had been tarnished, and the galaxy feared that this act was only the beginning. For most species, the breach in peace was an existential crisis. The neutral planets were on edge, uncertain of their future. The once unshakable calm that had held the galaxy together was crumbling, and old fears of war, the kind of war that humanity had known all too well, began to resurface. Empires and federations that had trusted the Empire for centuries now questioned their place in the galaxy. Every major power had to consider the possibility that they could be next. Humanity, however, had a different reaction. For them, the breach of peace was personal. After all, they had never fully trusted the Empire's rule. Humanity's history had been one of resistance and rebellion. They had fought their own wars and survived when all seemed lost. The breach of peace didn't just represent a threat to the galaxy, it was a challenge to humanity's very nature. Humans were not the passive observers they had once been. They had a reputation for overcoming the impossible, and they would not let this act of aggression slide by without consequence. The human delegation, led by their seasoned diplomat, was summoned to a high-level council. This was a critical moment for humanity, the first time they would speak directly to the Empire about their actions. The diplomat had served humanity's interests for years, navigating the complex web of galactic politics, but this was different. The diplomat's anger was palpable. Humanity had long been overlooked, seen as a mere curiosity among the greater powers of the galaxy. But now, with the Empire's breach, humanity's anger boiled to the surface. They had kept their rage in check for years, biding their time, but now it was a fire that could not be contained. As the diplomat prepared to address the council, they understood the gravity of the moment. The Empire had broken the peace, and the time for diplomacy as usual was over. Humanity would not accept being sidelined any longer. The galaxy needed to understand that humans were not like the other species. When pushed to the brink, they would fight back with everything they had. The diplomat knew that words alone wouldn't change the Empire's course, but they also understood that this meeting would set the tone for what was to come. The breach was more than a political crisis. It was a test of humanity's place in the galaxy. And humanity would respond not with fear or hesitation, but with defiance and rage. The Empire had forgotten one crucial thing: humanity never backed down no matter the odds. The human diplomat entered the room with a calm but determined demeanor, though the anger that had been brewing for days was evident in their eyes. They had spent years cultivating relationships with the galaxy's leaders, learning to navigate its political landscape with the subtlety of a seasoned negotiator. But this was different. The breach of peace was not something that could be solved with the usual pleasantries or polite diplomacy. The galaxy was on the brink and humanity's future hung in the balance. The council room was filled with representatives of the most powerful species in the galaxy, each one seated with a calculated expression. Their peaceful coexistence had been built on treaties and negotiations, but those agreements were now in tatters. The Empire's actions had shaken the foundation of everything they had worked for, and the stakes were high. Yet, as the diplomat took their place at the table, they knew that the usual tactics would not work here. "Let me be clear," the diplomat began, their voice steady but hard. "Humanity will not tolerate this breach. For centuries, we have stood by as passive observers, watching as the Empire imposed its will on others, making decisions that affect us all. But now you have gone too far. This attack on a peaceful colony, the destruction of trust, it cannot be ignored." There was a moment of silence as the other delegates exchanged looks. The human diplomat's words were unlike anything they had ever heard before in these diplomatic halls. For the first time, a representative of the human race was standing up, not with measured tones or subtle threats, but with pure, unrelenting rage. The Empire's representative, a towering figure of ancient and untouchable authority, cleared their throat. "Your concerns are noted, Ambassador." But the Empire's actions were, they paused, searching for the right words. "An isolated incident. It was a mistake, one that will be addressed. The peace is still intact." The human diplomat's gaze hardened. "No, it is not intact. You've broken it. And we will not allow you to cover it up with empty words and false assurances. Humanity has suffered through wars and conflicts of its own. We have fought to survive, to rise above the chaos that defined our past. But now you threaten to drag us back into a conflict we are not prepared to avoid." The Empire's representative shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to this level of aggression. "We understand your position, but the Empire is vast. We are the glue that holds the galaxy together. A single incident cannot destroy that. We will make reparations." The diplomat leaned forward, their voice cold and filled with raw emotion. "Reparations? Is that what you think this is about? A simple payment of resources or a peace treaty? This is about the trust that has been shattered. This is about the very foundation of peace that you have so carelessly broken. You cannot simply buy your way out of this. You've forgotten who we are." The council room fell into tense silence. The diplomat's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The human representative wasn't just talking about the immediate conflict. They were addressing the centuries of power dynamics, of control, of manipulation that had characterized the Galactic Empire's reign. Humanity, once a species of war and division, had changed. They had evolved. And now they were willing to fight not with weapons, but with the conviction that had defined them for millennia. "Humanity does not cower," the diplomat continued, their voice rising with intensity. "We do not bend to power or dominance. We have faced extinction and we've come out stronger. You may think you can overwhelm us with your fleets, your technology, your supposed superiority. But you are wrong. We will not allow you to dictate the future of the galaxy any longer." The Empire's representative took a slow breath, visibly trying to regain composure. They were clearly rattled. "Your anger is misplaced. You are making a dangerous assumption. We have the strength to resolve this issue swiftly, and your threats." The diplomat cut them off. "These are not threats, they are promises. If you think you can simply crush us, you are gravely mistaken. Humanity is not what it was. We have the will to fight, to resist, and we are ready to do so if you do not step back." The other delegates in the room shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. For years, they had watched humanity grow, and while they had dismissed them as nothing more than a fledgling species, they were beginning to realize that they had underestimated the human spirit. The diplomat's anger was not born from fear or desperation. It was born from the fierce desire to protect what humanity had fought for, to stand as equals in the galaxy, not as subjects. The Empire's representative clenched their fists, their towering presence no longer as imposing. "You would risk everything for this?" The diplomat stood tall. "We already have. And we will continue to do so if necessary. The question is, are you willing to risk everything to maintain your empire? Are you willing to destroy what you have built for centuries simply to keep control? Because if you are, then you will understand just how far humanity is willing to go to protect itself and the galaxy." The tension in the room was palpable. The representatives of other species exchanged glances, sensing the growing danger of the situation. The human diplomat had done what no one had expected. They had turned the table, not through subtlety or negotiation, but through pure conviction and rage. Humanity was no longer a passive participant in galactic politics. They had proven that they were willing to stand up for their principles, no matter the cost. As the meeting dragged on, the implications of the diplomat's words sank in. The Empire's grip on the galaxy was slipping, and humanity, for the first time, was ready to take its place in the galactic order, not as subordinates but as equals, unwilling to be silenced or subdued. The diplomatic mission had started as a response to a crisis, but it was quickly becoming something much more. Humanity had drawn a line in the sand, and the galaxy was now forced to decide whether it would step across it or respect it. The human diplomat had made their stand, and the consequences would echo across the stars. The human diplomat's words reverberated through the council chamber, stirring unease among the representatives of the Empire and other galactic powers. Humanity had not merely protested, they had issued a challenge, one that could not be ignored. The quiet undercurrent of apprehension rippled across the room as the diplomat's presence remained imposing, their words still hanging in the air, heavy with finality. It was clear now that the Empire's breach of peace had ignited something within humanity, a fierce, undeniable force that could not be quelled by mere promises or negotiations. As the representatives squirmed in their seats, the diplomat stood firm, unwavering. "Let me remind you all," they continued, voice cold yet filled with an unshakable conviction, "we are not a species that runs from conflict. Humanity has risen from the ashes of countless wars. We know the price of survival. You think you can intimidate us with your fleets, your power, your vast empire. But all you've done is awaken a force that has been dormant for far too long." The room was silent. Even the Empire's representative, a towering figure of authority and age, seemed to falter under the weight of the human diplomat's words. The rest of the council, long accustomed to the Empire's dominance and calculated threats, were now faced with something entirely unexpected, an adversary who didn't fear them, who was not interested in posturing or empty threats. Humanity had not only voiced their anger but had done so with a ferocity that even the Empire had not anticipated. The diplomat continued, their tone now sharp and precise, their words deliberate. "This is not just a political dispute. This is about the integrity of the galaxy. This is about the fact that you have broken the very foundation that has held this peace together. The Empire's arrogance has left us no choice but to stand up and say enough. You may have controlled the galaxy for millennia, but you've underestimated the one thing that has always been humanity's greatest strength, our ability to fight when we have nothing left to lose." The Empire's representative, still reeling from the force of the diplomat's speech, clenched their fists, their face a mask of frustration. They had hoped this confrontation could be handled with ease, a simple reprimand and assurances of reparation. But humanity was not reacting as expected. There was no fear, no hesitation. Instead, there was a burning resolve, a resolve that spoke not only to their past but to their future. "We will not be intimidated," the diplomat declared, their voice rising with intensity. "We will not bow to your empire. If you think for one moment that you can simply quash our efforts, you are gravely mistaken. The galaxy is changing and humanity is no longer content to sit in the background. You have made a grave error and you will answer for it." The Empire's representative stood, their imposing figure a stark contrast to the diplomat's fierce stance. "You dare threaten the Empire?" they spat, their voice dripping with disdain. "You are nothing compared to what we control. You are not a threat to us?" The diplomat's eyes narrowed. "You've made the mistake of thinking we are just another weak species in the galaxy. Humanity does not bend. We will never be ruled by fear again. You've already seen the beginnings of what we are capable of. The time for words is over." With a calm that belied the storm brewing beneath, the diplomat turned to face the other representatives, their words aimed directly at those in the room who had once viewed humanity as a mere curiosity. "I implore you to recognize what is happening here. The Empire is crumbling under its own weight, and they will take this galaxy down with them if they are not stopped. Humanity is ready to take a stand, not just for ourselves but for the galaxy at large. The question is, will you stand with us, or will you allow this reckless behavior to continue?" The room was tense, the representatives exchanging uneasy glances. Some appeared fearful, unsure of where this would lead. Others seemed reluctant to take sides, afraid of offending the Empire's power. But the diplomat's words had struck a chord, especially with those who had grown tired of the Empire's dominance. It was becoming clear that humanity was not going to back down, and that realization was enough to start shifting the political landscape in real time. The Empire's representative, now visibly rattled, attempted to regain control of the conversation. "This is not how we should proceed. You cannot hope to challenge us. No," the diplomat interjected, their voice final. "This is exactly how we proceed. You have pushed us to this point. You have forced humanity to act. The peace you've so carefully maintained for millennia is shattered, and now it's time for you to understand what that means. The galaxy is not yours to control. It never was. And humanity will not stand idly by while you continue to wield that power." The room was filled with an unsettling stillness as the diplomat's words sank in. The realization had hit them all. Humanity was no longer a side player in the galaxy. They had always been underestimated, dismissed as a species that was too young, too chaotic to have any real power. But now humanity's rage and resilience were undeniable. The Empire could no longer pretend that their position was unchallenged. As the tension reached its peak, the diplomat took a step back, their eyes scanning the room. "You've underestimated us before. You won't make that mistake again." And with that, the council was left with no easy options. The breach of peace was no longer a small issue, something that could be swept under the rug with promises of reparations. It was a defining moment, one that would determine the future of the galaxy. Humanity had made it clear, they would not be intimidated, not now, not ever. The Empire would have to face the consequences of its actions, and the galaxy would be forever changed by this new, unyielding force. The weight of the human diplomat's words lingered in the air, thick with tension. The room, once filled with calculated diplomacy and subtle threats, now crackled with the undeniable reality that humanity had drawn a line in the sand. No longer a passive bystander, humanity had made its position clear. The peace that the galaxy had taken for granted was gone, and the repercussions of the Empire's actions would not be swept under the rug. The delegates, many of whom had long aligned themselves with the Empire, now found themselves in a precarious position. The Empire's representative, struggling to maintain composure, glared across the room at the diplomat. "You underestimate us," they spat, their tone dripping with condescension. "You believe you can challenge the Empire, the very entity that has kept the galaxy in check for centuries. But you're wrong. You are out of your depth." The diplomat stood tall, unwavering. "No, it is you who have underestimated humanity. For too long, you have assumed that we would remain passive, that we would stay in the shadows while you dictate the fate of the galaxy. You are wrong. And now you will answer for the breach of peace you caused." The room was silent, the tension unbearable. The other delegates, once wary of the human diplomat's outburst, now looked at one another uncertainly. Humanity's anger had been a quiet force before, dismissed as unimportant, but now it was a fire that could not be ignored. The human representative's words had sparked something in the room, a shift in perception. The Empire, long seen as untouchable, was no longer the indisputable power. There was now a force that had awakened, one that had the will to fight back. The Empire's representative turned to the rest of the council, trying to rally support. "Do you hear this? This insolence? Humanity believes they can challenge the very foundation of the galaxy's order. They are nothing but a fleeting species, one that will burn out like the others who came before them." The diplomat's eyes locked with theirs, cold and resolute. "We may be new to the galactic stage, but we are not a fleeting species. We are not a footnote in history. We have already proven that we can survive. We have fought and bled for our place in the stars, and we will not let you take that away. Your empire is nothing but a paper tiger, and we are the ones who will expose it for what it truly is." The room shifted again. There were murmurs of agreement from some of the delegates, voices of doubt rising from others. The Empire, so accustomed to dominating every conversation, now found itself at the mercy of a species it had written off as insignificant. The very arrogance that had once fueled the Empire's rise was now their greatest weakness. Humanity had caught them off guard, and the realization was dawning that this was not a threat they could easily crush. One delegate, a representative from a powerful trading federation, spoke up. "Ambassador, we have seen how far the Empire is willing to go to protect its interests. But the peace that humanity speaks of, has that not been the foundation of our prosperity? Can we truly afford to let it crumble for the sake of pride?" The diplomat nodded, acknowledging the truth in the delegate's words. "That is exactly what we are fighting for, the peace. But peace cannot be maintained at the expense of justice. The Empire's breach is not just a violation of trust, it is a threat to the very idea of peace itself. If we allow this to go unchallenged, what's to stop them from doing it again and again until the galaxy is at war once more?" The tension in the room was palpable, but there was a subtle shift. The other delegates, who had long lived under the Empire's shadow, were beginning to question their allegiance. The Diplomat had turned their rage into a rallying cry, and it was impossible to ignore. The fragile peace was indeed in jeopardy, not because of humanity's anger, but because of the Empire's reckless actions. The Empire's representative, realizing they were losing control of the situation, rose to their feet, their voice now tinged with desperation. Enough of this. Humanity has no place in the future of this galaxy. You are nothing without the Empire's protection. The Diplomat's gaze hardened. We were nothing before we learned to fight. But we learned. And now we will fight not just for ourselves, but for every species in this galaxy that has been silenced by your power. We will not be cowed by your threats or your fleets. The Empire has failed. And we are not afraid. The room fell into a tense silence, the words echoing in the minds of every delegate present. Humanity had drawn its line. There would be no more negotiations, no more empty promises. The time for subtlety had passed. The Empire's reckless actions had forced humanity to take a stand, and the galaxy would now have to decide whether it would stand with them or remain complicit in the Empire's corruption. For the first time in a long while, the balance of power seemed uncertain. The Empire, once invincible, now seemed vulnerable. The Diplomat had made it clear, humanity would no longer be passive. The Empire could no longer rely on its age-old tactics of intimidation and control. The galaxy was changing and humanity was leading the charge. The decision had been made. Humanity would fight. And the Empire would have to reckon with the consequences of breaking the peace they had worked so hard to maintain. The question that remained was whether the galaxy would follow humanity's lead, or whether it would be too late.